It was years ago when I saw Vinod present for the first time. This was, I think, at school many, many years ago. He said something to the effect of, an entrepreneur is someone who dares to dream the dreams and is foolish enough to try to make those dreams come true. Why foolish? Because if all of us at the time knew the amount of perseverance, grit, determination, passion that is needed to revolutionize an industry, frankly, only the foolish few would undertake that cause. And so at Khosla, we're obviously grateful that you folks have decided to join the ranks of the foolish few. And so to help you on that journey, for the next panel, we've chosen 3 of our veteran CEOs from one of the most challenging sectors out there for entrepreneurs today, clean tech, with the hopes that you can draw parallels from their tactics and stories that will be useful to your business, whether you're building handheld EKGs, transforming the food industry, or building communities of readers and writers. So for those of you who aren't close to the industry, a quick flash. The last few years in clean tech have been incredibly difficult. Many high-profile, well-funded companies have been overspending and have shut down. VC investment has fallen in this sector, and public stocks have taken a big beating. But the fundamentals driving the need for clean tech haven't changed. And the companies that have differentiated technologies, who have managed their spend well, and have partnered effectively, have survived. So despite the doom and gloom, 12 of our portfolio companies here at Khosla in 2012 raised large rounds, most of them in the $30 to $60 million range, most with upticks in valuation, and many inking partnerships that give them a strong shot at commercializing their black swan technologies. LanzaTech, EcoMotors, and Stion are 3 of these companies, and in the next 25 minutes, we're going to delve a bit into the tactics that they've used to manage their survival to success, specifically focusing on an area that at Khosla we like to talk about as if-then scenario planning and how you can manage your spend to achieve success. So a very quick intro into these companies. At the far left of the stage, LanzaTech is represented by Jennifer Holmgren, the CEO. They've developed a technology out of New Zealand that converts waste gas from industrial processes into valuable fuels and chemicals. They've entered into joint ventures with 2 of the largest steel manufacturers in the world that will be fully funding their plant scale-up. Zero capital from Lanza. Jennifer led the renewable energy and chemicals business at UOP and Honeywell and led the business from inception to commercialization of multiple novel biofuels technologies. She also shares my love for Star Trek. EcoMotors is developing, actually, we'll go to Chet. Stion is developing high-efficiency thin-film solar modules that are comparable to silicon modules in performance, but at the significantly lower cost of thin film. They have gotten to production with 1/10 the capital of some of their other well-known thin-film competitors, with production partnerships that are now around the world. Chet was the president of Shell Solar, which later became Siemens Solar, and I believe he is the longest tenured solar CEO out there, and perhaps the most gritty operator and patient fundraiser, according to Vinod.
It's all of us.
He's also one of the reasons I'm here at Khosla, having a long relationship with him. Last but not least is EcoMotors, which is developing the next generation of internal combustion engines that seek to achieve 20 to 50% better fuel economy at comparable cost versus today's state-of-the-art engines. They recently signed a non-exclusive agreement with a large Chinese conglomerate that will invest $200 million into building their first engine plant with guaranteed capacity to the company, and again, zero CapEx from EcoMotors. Don was one of the top executives at GM and also served as the vice chairman of Delphi. So the first question to start, each of you has managed to get into pilot production with significantly less capital than your competitors, and again, in some cases, 1/10 of the cost. Why is that the case, and what lessons can you share on building your company to be more capital efficient?
Okay, I guess I'm on the end. I'd rather talk about Star Trek and Star Wars, but okay. Let's see. I guess the thing I would focus on is always identifying your partner's need, right? You've always got to pitch what you want, and in our case, what we wanted is to get to a demo as quickly as possible in the context of what they wanted to do. Our partner, Bow Steel, had a goal to reduce their carbon footprint and to be seen as reducing their carbon footprint. We had the ability to give them that, and so very simply, it's almost a sales. Just make sure that they know what value they get and that you meet their needs. It's never a case of them meeting your needs. That never works.
Chet?
So I think in the, well, it's pretty damn loud. In the early days, when we were looking to develop our product and establish the research lab, we went out and basically raided defunct companies. And so we bought almost all of our equipment in the very early stage was used or partially operational, brought it back into capability. And that gave us, with just a few $1 million, the ability to get to a full-scale product. As we scaled beyond that, I think we made a fairly early decision to simply exploit the investment that had been made in ancillary industries. So rather than developing our own tools and rather than looking in that domain, particularly as a VC-funded company where you have very limited amount of resources, capital, and talent pool to address that, we adopted our processes in material science so we could exploit industries like semiconductors and glass coating and things like that and minimize the investment that was involved in developing tools or software or other things like that. I think that had a very, very big impact not only on the initial investment, but I think longer term in terms of the ongoing O&M cost, the improvements to those technologies, which will be primarily borne by other industries rather than our industry itself.
There's an urban myth that you bought your first sputtering machine off of eBay that you had used 10 years ago. Is that true?
We didn't buy it off eBay, but I bought that machine twice. That is true. I bought it when I was head of Siemens Solar, and I bought it back from them after SolarWorld had decided to quit using it. So that's true.
In our case, we're up against the four-stroke engine, which is the prevailing technology for the last century or so. And in our case, we looked for partners that wanted to disrupt the industry themselves. Either they had desire to change something there. One of our initial partners was Navistar, and that was their intent. But later, Jean Ding, who is the group we've signed with now, realized they probably could not compete with normal four-stroke technology. So they looked to us because we had an innovation, more efficiency, lower cost, and those sort of things. We created then a development agreement with them and a contract, so they paid for some of the development of that. That led then to a strategic agreement where we got significant capacity from them for our own use, where we will get engines from them at a significant discount, about 10% of the capacity they put in for the 200 million or will put in, we will get. So that allows us to license them. It's non-exclusive. We get about 10% of that. 10% of their capacity is upwards of about $800 million over the short time frame of this. So it gives us that capacity without any capex from our standpoint. And then during the negotiations, we quite frankly had to hang tough on non-exclusive. I think that was a tough point from their standpoint. We tried to get some restrictions, not as many as we wanted, but at the end of the day, we wanted to get a deal also so that we would have this capacity, which we think would help in fundraising and so forth. So that was sort of the general approach with this particular partner.
So I think with Lanza and EcoMotors, both CEOs mentioned this demand from the customer to partner at all costs with these early stage startups and be willing to fund a significant portion of the scale up because those were the only technologies that they had seen that could actually accomplish this. So the ability to differentiate and to sell and convince your partners or your customers that you're the only game in town is a very powerful lever, I think, in securing the partnerships that you guys did. And then with Chet, one of the powerful design paradigms from the early going at Stion was being able to manufacture everything using existing infrastructure. As Chet mentioned, he repurposed an old machine that he used a decade ago, which turned out to be really the winning factor in thin film, where everyone else was inventing equipment, inventing machinery to try to solve this problem. They were taking that risk out of the equation significantly and focusing really on the technology. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. I think not dissimilar to what EcoMotors has done, Lanza has done as well. Although they weren't the customer, they were surely a group of people that wanted to enter into the solar space. They had done a tremendous amount of research in thin films particularly, and ultimately decided that they wanted to work with Stion. So we took a very similar tack that Don had taken. We licensed TSMC, which is the largest semiconductor foundry in the world, a portion, but not all of our technologies. We didn't and give them sort of the keys to the gate, so to speak. And as part of that deal, in addition to an investment in the company, some license fees, we also secured about 20% of the capacity that they have. We're entitled to offtake at fundamentally their cost. So I think that gave us the ability to, and I think Vinod had termed this a couple of years ago, the capital light strategy, where we could exploit the investment of TSMC for our purposes to gain in the market without having to make that. And that was an offset of roughly about $80 million of additional capital expense we would have had to make.
Now, they were not in this solar business before.
Prior to this time, no. We licensed
licensed
the portion of the technology. That's correct.
Now one of the
similarly with John Ding, they were in the engine business. Then they came out of the engine business, and so they knew how hard it was with the normal stuff, and then saw an opportunity to come back in. So I would say very similar in approach there.
Now, partnerships have been absolutely key to all of your success, and obviously fundraising, especially in this environment, has been very unpredictable, challenging, maybe taking 3 to 5 times longer than you would have thought. In each case, the company's really thought about scenario planning, if-then planning, and it's certainly a philosophy that Vinod carries very strongly. Can you each talk about how you went through that process? What were some of the tough calls that you had to make? How did you cope with the unpredictability, and how did this scenario planning help?
Want to start that way?
In our case, we developed about 4 different distinct scenarios. Again, what bad things could happen, and then what would our countermeasures be? I mentioned Navistar. They were one of our earlier engagements there. They're a market leader in the commercial vehicle space. They make engines, they use engines, and they also sell engines. And they wanted a distinct approach to our technology. They had their own ideas on emissions. But early on, as part of the scenario plan, and I engaged and says, what happens if that does not work? So we ran a parallel process to that. At some point, they hit the wall on their technology, on their engines, not on ours, and began to unravel. And so we immediately stopped that project, probably about 3 months before they hit the wall, and then just went with our other part of the parallel program, which turned out to be what they would end up using anyway. So again, we kept a close eye on it. We realized how hard it was for them to do that. They were not able to do it. If you follow Navistar, they hit the wall over that, and they're just trying to save their own company right now. But I would say that was a part of one of the if-thens, was what happens if it doesn't fly? What do we do? We did the same thing with John Ding. John Ding is a Chinese conglomerate. They're a slow pay, and we had a lot of issues there with how do you get them to pay, and sometimes you asked about tough calls, we had to go to pencils down until we see a check and convey that information, and 8 days later a check showed up, so it was helpful. So I don't know how many times you can do that, but
and very quickly before we move on, talk about the level of detail by which we had the if-then plan.
Yeah, I think it was an extraordinary amount of detail in terms of what do you do workforce-wise, assets, everything else. What are you going to do with that? How do you bring the burn down for that particular project? And then how do you go after patching up the hole? So we did, as you can imagine, endless spreadsheets, basically by month, and how long would this go, and what should we do in each situation. So I think the detail was, it never turns out exactly that way, but I'd say a level of detail that you were thinking through what happens, about what time, when do you need to pull the trigger on a particular decision, and how's it impact the company.
Great, Chet, how did you guys do it? What were some of the tactics there?
Well, I would surely tell you that if we flunked lunch on anything, it was timing on fundraising, because I don't think we could have picked a worse time. But we went out in the last quarter of 2008 as an example, and then after the Solyndra bankruptcy, and so our timing was fairly difficult, and surely the clean tech bubble, and particularly solar, the shine had come off the apple, for lack of a better term. But nevertheless, I think we knew we were going to have to raise additional capital. We continued to exploit partnerships. I think that was key to be able to do it. And during that process, I think obviously you have to make some very tough decisions. Much like Don, we looked at best case, predicted case and absolute worst case. We had a managed tendency to lead on the worst case of the management side and look for the predictable case to be the actual upside case. So in many cases, I mean, we just simply did not spend capital. There were times where we actually had to reduce workforce pretty significantly and ask the remaining workforce to step up and fill those holes. I mean, I think the challenge remained the same. The amount of work didn't change, but the number of people that you were allowed to do it would be significantly less. And of course, every single expenditure was scrutinized in somewhat bloody detail, I would say. And you know, you have to simply set your priorities, and then this process goes into sort of kind of a weekly review process where every single thing, so you know, spending limits were dropped dramatically, discretionary spending was stopped, hiring was frozen, bonuses weren't paid, things like that. But that gave us the ability to reduce that burn rate, to stay in business, focus on the sort of key things we still need to accomplish, and then aggressively hit the street and try to find the right funding sources to continue to do the company, which, by the way, always takes a lot longer and is a lot more difficult than anybody would think. I think the only round that was actually easy in the history of Stion was the B round. So I wasn't there for the A round. That was when Lightspeed came in, when you were at Lightspeed, Andrew.
My A round was great because I wasn't there. So.
Yeah. So that one was pretty easy for me too. But I think subsequent to that, it was none of these were sort of, you know, step up and hit it out of the park. You really had to take a lot of swings.
But I think that Stion has the distinction of being I think the only startup that has never had a down round, which actually is quite impressive given the environment. Both of you guys talked about people being a very crucial part of the whole if-then planning. What were some of the tough calls you guys had to make, and how did you prioritize that given the different scenarios that were at work?
One thing I wanted to mention on this is we tried to keep our our prototypes are fairly expensive. There's a lot of components in their castings and so forth, so they're wickedly expensive. So we tried to run not owning any equipment or any assets. So we rented everything, dynamometers and test facilities, machining centers and so forth. So roughly speaking, the spend was about a third of people, about a third for rented testing facilities, and about a third for contracted specialists like computational fluid dynamics that we didn't have. So we tried to keep about 2/3 of this fairly variable. So in the if-then, you felt that you could bring it down to sort of theoretically about a third of the burn if you had to. And so we structured it that, and we maintained that basically so that the if-then that you can actually pull the trigger and do it. If you have a lot of assets, in our case, you could buy Acades, for instance, has its own dynamometers. They're another advanced engine company. Very hard for them to bring the spend down.
Well, did you want to make a quick comment, Chet?
And then I'll comment.
Yeah, I think at Stion, you know, maybe slightly different. I think most of our cost was internally generated. So, you know, the first step obviously was to decide what was the most important activities to keep pushing forward, like our research and development on our next generation product. We chose not to cut at all, and we didn't cut our expenditure there, and we didn't cut our plans to go forward, which means that other departments had to give more, so to speak, which is not an easy thing to manage internally, particularly when that group is working on something that's not immediate but in the future. I would say also we worked very hard. We begged, borrowed, and stole, all those things, with some of our key suppliers to give us some breathing room. We had to manage those relationships because surely a lot of companies were going bankrupt at that time and they were getting scared. Some did, some didn't, but the ones that did helped out quite a bit. And I think, like any of those situations where you get in a cycle, and most of these businesses, I think, will see these cycles, and it'd be very unfortunate, very fortunate if you didn't, is that I think you just have to sort of be prepared to deal with it when it comes, and that means taking these decisions fairly quickly and sometimes fairly draconian, but at the end of the day, I think it was the right decision for the company.
And Jennifer, turning to you, you were in the enviable position of having to potentially turn away money because in the last round you ended up raising double of what we thought we were going to raise, which caused some interesting debate within the partnership. But how have you thought about the scenario planning and if-thens, where you not only have multiple JV partners, you've got the Chinese government that has to make decisions, a number of different product development threads. How have you done your if-then planning and managed to stretch your runway?
Yeah, so I think the easiest thing, and this is always a problem, is the easiest thing to cut or to think that you want to cut is your long-term R&D, your long-term work. So in our case, it's actually the tool development to do the molecular biology, to do the next generation work, right? So when we did our planning, we planned by activities, and we said, okay, this is the thing that's going to get cut if we don't have enough money. So what we did is we went out and found somebody who would fund that work because they had similar interests. So then we protect that, okay? So that's one thing you can do. The other if-then scenario comes to the things that are short-term, right? So we were trying to do a demo, certain amount of money. Our partner was paying for the demo. But in the demo, there's a long list of things that we didn't know. If you wait until you know all the answers, you're never going to get out there. So we were going to do a demo, and I would say 50% of what we needed to accomplish at the demo scale, we hadn't even done at the lab scale. Vinod, you didn't hear me say that. Okay. And so what happened is we prioritized the ones that we had to do while the demo was being built, and then the ones we could do when the demo was built. So we always prioritize by activities. What are the risks of everything, and when do they have to be done? Which has to be done first, and which can wait? There's always something that can wait. And if you think there's something you really must do for the long run, find a way to protect it, find something you can do. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's how we always plan.
Great. Yeah, so a couple of observations, and then I'll go to my last question. The level of detail I think that these folks up here went through in developing the if-then planning were considerable, to the point in EcoMotor's case where they had every month a decision tree of, for these partners or these development activities, if we didn't get money from somewhere else, we were going to cut this off or we're going to stop this. So it was a very fascinating spreadsheet model, actually, that helped us during very difficult times where one partner just went away completely. We were able to react, respond, survive long enough to get lucky and get a Bluebird in to lead their Series C, which was a great financing, which then led to this development deal. I think another interesting theme that you can pull out of these discussions too is that there's this notion of not just investing in R&D or new development threads superfluously, but challenging your team to be able to find other people to be able to fund it for you if you don't have plentiful capital or if you don't have limitless resources. And I think each one of these folks have done a really good job of prioritizing those things and then finding the right partners to be able to come in so that it justifies the development around these areas. Otherwise, without a customer on the other end of the pike here, it's very difficult to commercialize these technologies in any case. So the last question I'm going to ask, again, related to this if-then planning and making it a bit broader for especially some of the IT folks or healthcare folks thinking about it, is how did product market fit apply to the way you prioritized and the way that you thought about if-then? And Chet, in your case, you had sort of a first-generation product in a single junction and then a next-generation product in the tandem. So how did you think about product market fit? How did that apply to your scenario planning? And
well, I surely think in Stion's case, when the company was originally funded, and I think this is pretty instrumental, that the Gen 1 product was a route to get into the market, to establish the channel, and to get some knowledge experience. But in and of itself is not a home run. It would not, a sustainable product and a sustainable way to go, but wouldn't provide that level of return or margin that would be required to really be a winner. So the company was in fact founded on the second generation, not the first generation product. And so at all cost, it was important to preserve that. So I don't want people to take the wrong idea from our discussion here. I mean, if you always plan for the worst and you kind of build your business model around planning for the worst, then you'll get to where you're unwilling to take appropriate level of risk. I think what you have to do is to live within your means, plan prudently, but don't forget the gold ring. I think you have to continue to shoot for the gold ring. You have to keep that target clearly in your mind. And despite whatever obstacles, whether they're technical or financial, otherwise, you've got to drive to get those done. And as a CEO, the other recommendation I'd make is, look, we can only concentrate, at least I can, on maybe 2 or 3 things. I'm just not bright enough to do 50 things. So I think in the case of Stion, we made a very clear decision that there were a lot of things that were sort of B, C, or D priorities, things that needed to be done but weren't absolutely critical to the success or the future of the company, at least in the short term. And as the CEO, to focus on those 2 things, to drive it to the product level, because if you have no money, whether it's either through your investors or through revenue, you don't have a business anyway. So, figure out one way or another, get the company funded, get the revenue up, and live within your means without getting discouraged. And look, we got thrown out of a lot of places, and we've been thrown out of better ones than maybe some of the last ones. So I think that rejection's just part of that story, and you just got to persevere. Now, the last thing I'd add, and I'll shut up, Andrew, is that we didn't do it alone. We had a lot of help from our existing investors. As a good example, we had been working for the last year to bring money into the Middle East, which we just recently started finishing that closing process, got some of the money in the door. But it also took Vinod and Tony Blair and Samir to go out and meet with these guys in Saudi Arabia and kind of put the hammer on them. So I think the other thing you got to learn is not to be too proud and not to assume that all of your good fortune is a function of your own efforts. And if you can get help and you can solicit that help, and if that means you got to go kiss the ring to do it, then go kiss the ring and get it done. I think that you owe that to your company, and you owe it to your employees, and you owe it to your investors.
Don and Jennifer, well said.
Yeah, I agree. The one comment I would make is don't fall in the trap of thinking that money is more important than time. Even when you're running out of money, time to deliver your technology, I think, is more important than money. I hope.
Good way to run yourself out of money is.
I know,
right?
but just remember that you can't cost cut your way to prosperity. But so the if-then scenarios are actually what's really, really important, right? Because that's how you're able to mitigate any downside risk while you're trying to get to the goal as quickly as possible. Because slowing down, in my mind, is never the solution. You lose if you're second.
Don?
Well said. I think I would chime in that on the cost cutting, you've got to be careful that what you're really trying to do is always maintained as what your focus is. In our case, we had some options. We have diesel engines, gasoline engines, and so forth, single module and dual module, and we put some of those on hold, and sort of say, okay, when we see a customer show up that has a particular interest there, maybe we can talk them into sharing the development of that. And so we put that on the shelf and drive hard on the area where we got some traction. So again, we haven't forgotten about it, it's just not up yet.
So I think just to close here, I think you've been hearing a lot of different themes and tactics. In the last piece, we heard from the 3 panelists that part of the thinking through if-then planning is around the prioritization. So you can't be at the expense of the black swan type of Mount Everest goal and cost cut your way there, but you need to be able to do that so that you live long enough to be lucky to get other partners to come in, to get the next round of funding, and to have a shot at achieving that. So with that, why don't we give a quick hand to our panelists here.